The most unforgiving aspect of George Miller's last two films in the Mad Max franchise has been the never-ending dystopian desert they call the Wasteland. If you did not know, the Wasteland was previously known as the Australian Outback and is a vast dry region in the Australian wilderness. It existed way before the fall, which is what led to the otherworldly events and the collapse of Western civilization as seen in Fury Road and Furiosa. This location prevails as the true sign of hopelessness in Miller's totalitarian saga and is indeed the never-ending barren desert we've seen in all 5 Mad Max films. Now, the Wasteland that was shown in the first 2 Mad Max films was set pretty much untouched by any form of ecological disaster, and because both the films were set before any nuclear exchange, it is quite plausible that we only saw an Australian outback exist in reality. The landscape back then was dominated by dry scrublands with sparse vegetation and harsh deserts. Nearer to what were once populated areas, roads were still visible even though they were worn and dusty, but after an unseen nuclear exchange, the Wasteland and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, and Mad Max Fury Road had dramatically changed. The once dusty rock of the outback turned into vast sand dunes with hardly any pre-fall roads left. And because radiation had poisoned much of the population, the once lush green place transformed into a toxic swamp. The most striking feature of this wasteland was the presence of massive destructive sandstorms. These terrifying tempests of wind, sand, and lightning are likely caused by a combination of climate change and nuclear fallout, representing one of the greatest dangers to the wasteland's inhabitants. Now, given how deadly this place was in an already dying world, basic resources were difficult to come by, and thus began the power struggle and the hierarchy between different warlords of Wasteland. In this world, power comes from possessing basic necessities like water, food, and gasoline. The one who had it all was indeed the king of the Wasteland. In this video, we will only focus on the Wasteland we saw in the recently released Furiosa and 2015's Fury Road. So without wasting another moment, let's get right to it.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
The Citadel. As the Wasteland was divided into 3 strong fortresses, I thought it would be a good idea to start right from the top with the Citadel, the only place in Wasteland to hold the biggest chunk of all resources and major highlight in both Fury Road and Furiosa. So the Citadel is made up of 3 rock towers that rise above an aquifer or relatively fresh water, and by channeling this water through the rocks, the inhabitants of the Citadel had managed to irrigate a small portion of the Wasteland. Originally, it was the stronghold of a paramilitary pseudo-religious cult led by Colonel Joseph Immortan Joe Moore, a decorated military veteran from the Australian Army. But after Immortan Joe's death in Fury Road, the Citadel evolved into a more civilized and sophisticated urban society. It grew from a town into a city, becoming a haven for refugees from across the desert, while rising as a beacon of hope and learning in the Wasteland. Originally known as the Aquifer, it was controlled by a group of heavily armed men who protected the water resources. After Colonel Joe Moore took over, he transformed the aquifer into the Citadel. Only the privileged lived within the guarded walls of the Citadel, which was again divided between 3 towers, inhabited by people depending on their ranks. Inside the Citadel, mostly Joe's warriors lead regular lives, repairing cars, constructing buildings, and keeping prisoners as blood donors for future battles. But the ordinary people weren't allowed to enter this gated area and lived at the foot of the rocks, working for the Citadel in exchange for water that Joe extracted from the earth, known as aqua cola. Now that you have a basic idea of how the Citadel works, let's discuss how the hierarchy within the Citadel works. Immortan Joe. As you know, the king is always at the top, and Immortan Joe is the king of the Citadel. He lives in the main tower of the Citadel, which he calls as his headquarters. Inside the tower, there are hydroponic gardens, a milking room, water control systems, and at the very top of it is the biodome where the 5 wives are kept guarded. It is unarguably the most luxurious part of the complex, far beyond what the average wasteland dweller could imagine. Here, there's direct access to fresh water, hydroponic gardens, gardens brimming with fruits and vegetables and a collection of pre-war knowledge stored in a library of books. The Five Wives also had a live-in tutor known as Miss Giddy, and later a group of historymen oversaw this repository of pre-war lore and artifacts. Their role was to educate not just the Five Wives but also all the children of the Citadel, ensuring that knowledge from the past was not lost. Apart from that, in the ground floor of Joe's headquarters lived many women who were especially fattened to keep producing breast milk that was pumped and consumed within the Citadel for nutrition. The high-ranking generals. This mainly includes people in the position of power, like the mayor of GasTown called People Eater, Joe's son Rictus Erectus, or the Bullet Farmer, Major Kalashnikov. They all are from the topmost part of Joe's army and belong to the ruling class of the Citadel. All of Joe's most important and highest-ranking generals were also seen to be spending most of their time in the first tower along with him, although I am not sure if these people lived here. But yes, all of Joe's sons definitely lived within the headquarters with their father and enjoyed all the lavish resources that the Citadel had to offer. The middle class. The second tower of the Citadel was home to what's left of the middle class, a mix of people with valuable skills like mechanics, medics, and more. I'm talking about people like the organic mechanic and others with similar skill sets that might add value to Joe's empire. It was also where important army personnel like Praetorian Jack or any army men of similar ranks lived. The same tower also houses a blood bank where captives from the Wasteland are kept as blood donors for the sick war boys. At the top is a garden, and the tower acts as a barrier between Immortan Joe's main headquarters and the lower-class residents living in the third tower. The War Boys. Living in the second tower of the Citadel, the War Boys are essentially the paramilitary force serving as Immortan Joe's servants and soldiers. They are chosen at a young age by the guardians of the Citadel's elevator platform and are trained to be fanatical followers of Immortan Joe, who they see as their immortal leader in the cult of V8. Mostly inspired from Vikings and Japanese kamikaze pilots, these War Boys are deeply loyal and unquestioningly devoted to Immortan Joe. They see sacrificing their lives for him as a noble act and never questioned the morality of his commands. Becoming a war boy is seen as a great honor within the Empire, although the people selected for this role are often unaware of the process. The guards at the elevator platform carefully choose individuals who are strong and healthy as they descend into the middle of the wretched. In a scene that didn't make it to the final cut of the movie, it's revealed that the wretched desperately wanted their children to be taken to the Citadel, viewing it as their only chance for survival. Unfortunately, their pleas were usually met with harsh rejection in a manner that's quite brutal. When kids arrived at the Citadel, they get new names and join as war pups, where they are thought to idolize the V8 cult and adore everything mechanical. They grow up learning to tinker and fix things, earning nicknames like Rev Heads or Black Thumbs for their skills in crafting mechanical gadgets, especially related to vehicles and combat. But even though they are trained in mechanics, these war boys were not allowed to join battles right away. So most of the time, war boys spend their days dealing with boredom, broken up only by occasional raids or supply runs. What is really surprising is that there was a hierarchy even within these war boys, which was mostly based on age and duties. There are two levels, the first being the lower ranked ones without head markings, followed by the higher ranked ones like Slit and Ace, who have gray pigment on their heads. The high ranking war boys that go to battle are often mobilized by imperators like Furiosa and Immortan's other top commanders, who are recognizable by the black mechanical grease on their foreheads. The working class. So the third tower of the Citadel was inhabited by the working class residents who were lured in from the wretched with promises of a brighter future. Unfortunately, they were instead forced into grueling labor, notably being used as mill rats powering the elevator platform. Their lives were cut short due to neglect as they received far less care compared to the rest of the Citadel's inhabitants. The wretched. At the very bottom of society were the wretched, a huge group of hungry, sick, and homeless folks who would travel across the wasteland hoping for a better life at the Citadel. Occasionally, Immortan Joe would appear from his headquarters on a rocky balcony embellished with a skull face. From there, he would use levers to release water from giant pipes, sending it cascading down to the foot of the rock, where the wretched would rush to collect the water with any containers they could find. Immortan Joe controlled their access to water very tightly, using it to keep them in line. Even though the wretched didn't didn't fully buy into Joe's cult of V8. They saw him as their leader, but little did they know that Joe hid his face and frail body under a mask and armor, making it hard for them to see the real him, leaving them no choice but to buy the godlike act he pulled. At the end of Fury Road, when Max finally revealed Joe's dead body, the wretched tore it apart, realizing he wasn't immortal after all. This shattered the illusion of his power, and the hold he had over them disappeared in an instant. GasTown. One thing to keep in mind is that in the new Mad Max film Furiosa, which is a prequel to the 2015's Fury Road, we saw Dementus pretty much taking over GasTown. Before that, under Immortan Joe's rule, GasTown was governed by the People Eater. GasTown is like the heart of the Wasteland's fuel supply. It is where they refine all the gas and send it out to other places in the Wasteland. This place is also a key part of what they call the power triangle in the Wasteland. Along with the Citadel and Bullet Farm, it's built on an old oil drilling and refining site, so naturally there is plenty of gasoline there. They use this oil everywhere without much care, making it a valuable resource in the region. Unlike Citadel, GasTown is a dirty place with everything coated in grime from continuously burning and refining fossil fuels. The air there is thick with chemicals and toxic fumes that makes breathing very hard. But again, GasTown is a powerhouse because it has diesel, petrol, and oil while having the generators that make electricity. Interestingly enough, the whole of GasTown sits surrounded by a moat of oily sludge and tar that oozes from the ground, with just one heavily guarded way in, and despite facing many attacks, GasTown has always managed to defend itself. The people who work there, whether they are considered workers or slaves, live in makeshift homes but are relatively lucky by Wasteland standards because they have basic needs like food, shelter, and water, and are at a lesser risk of violence if they keep their heads down and do their work. These folks living in such a harsh environment are some of the few who can be called civilians in this world, because inside GasTown, there is suffering and brutality, no doubt, but there's also a chance for a better life and some idea of safety as compared to the chaos outside the walls. As a second fortress of the Wasteland, GasTown is a pretty important place, which is why Dementus and his biker horde came back to the Citadel, threatening Immortan Joe to blow up the whole of GasTown if he was not allowed to rule it. That is how they struck a peace treaty where Dementus was seen as the legitimate ruler of GasTown in Furiosa in exchange for filling up Joe's tanks with gasoline, while they kept receiving a steady supply of food and water. Now let's take a look into the complicated hierarchy within GasTown. Dr. Dementus. If you watched Furiosa, you already know how Dementus is the main bad guy of the new Mad Max film. Dementus, the leader of the biker horde, becomes a powerful warlord in the Wasteland, but before that, Furiosa's story begins with him. She is taken by his men from her home at the Green Place as proof that a place of abundance indeed exists. Dementus' cynicism and dark humor is the highlight of his character. He ruled the biker horde with an iron fist, and to display his tyranny, he often targeted smaller groups, drawing and quartering their bodies using motorcycles. This guy actually believes himself to be some sort of a great almighty, and to support that, he rides on a chariot made out of 3 motorcycles. Dementus is loud, bold, and morally bankrupt. He often blames the Wasteland lifestyle for his tyranny and talks about how he had to rise up even though he lost his kids to the fall. But despite his flaws, Dementus is quite charming and good at hiding his true self. He's a bit like a mix of Lord Humongous and Max Rokotansky, with a wild streak of immaturity that sometimes make him seem like a stubborn child throwing a tantrum while also being dangerously violent. Dementus was always vying for power, which is why when he gets hold of Furiosa's mother, he tortures Mary Jabasa to spill the truth about the Green Place, and when she refuses to comply, he brutally kills her off as Furiosa watches. This exact moment is what makes him the subject of Furiosa's rage and direction of revenge for her future. Later, when Dementus comes down across a battered war boy, he reaches the Citadel and blatantly asks Immortan Joe to step down, which of course fails spectacularly. Later, as his crew storms GasTown, setting it up as a ticking bomb, Dementus braves into Citadel's heart and blackmails Joe till he gives him the leadership of GasTown in exchange of Furiosa and his organic mechanic. But of course, this peace does not last very long. As years pass by, Furiosa grows up within the walls of the Citadel, while Dementus finds himself growing super unhappy about the crisis at GasTown. His biker horde has finally begun revolting, especially because of the shortage of food and water. Dementus feels like he got a raw deal and puts the blame on Immortan Joe and the other big shots. So he decides to take matters into his own hands and grabs control of the Bullet Farm. But he does not not stop there. Dementus wants the Citadel too. Well, if you've seen the film, you already know how things go haywire and his actions lead to what the history men call the 40-day Wasteland War. This super brutal conflict ends up wiping out most of Dementus' biker horde, leaving him nowhere to go but run. But he does not escape fate this time because Furiosa gets to him and exacts her revenge by ending his life. Biker hordes. Ruled directly by the warlord Dementus, the biker horde are a group of marauding bikers in the Wasteland. Like other factions out there, they fight to take whatever resources they can find. But most of them left to form their own smaller factions after GasTown had run out of basic necessities. The remaining others began actively revolting against Dementus, which finally drove him to bring them into conflict with Immortan Joe at the Citadel. Most of the biker hordes were wiped out in the Wasteland War, and the ones who lived either joined smaller rogue gangs or became one of the wretched. After the fall of Dementus and his biker hordes, GasTown went back under Immortan Joe's rule and was again ruled by its old mayor, the People Eater. Bullet Farm. As the third and last threshold of the Wasteland, the Bullet Farm is originally an abandoned lead mine situated at the west of the Citadel, but after the fall, the Bullet Farm was transformed into a weapons factory and is now used to make guns, gunpowder, and ammunition to support the Citadel's fight against other gangs in the Wasteland. This place is best described as a quarry sunk into a large crater in the earth, with a dirt road winding down the walls into the central basin. The Bullet Farm was inhabited by the Bullet Farmers, who were in turn ruled by Major Kalashnikov, popularly known as the Bullet Farmer. For a brief period of time, the Bullet Farm was stormed in and seized by Dementus, but that did not last very long because Praetorian Jack and Furiosa went in to challenge him and basically destroyed Bullet Farm in the process. Now let's talk about the main power dominator of the region, the Bullet Farmer. The Bullet Farmer, who is formerly known by his military rank and surname Major Kalashnikov, is an old ally and comrade of Immortan Joe, the leader of the Citadel, and leads the faction known as the Bullet Farmers. Before the fall, Major Kalashnikov was a professional soldier and officer in the Australian Army, serving under Colonel Joe Moore during the Oil and Water Wars. But after chaos broke out in the cities, Kalashnikov eventually became Moore's right-hand man in a gang of ex-soldiers. Heavily armed and well-equipped, they moved further inland, raiding and pillaging resources from survivors. Eventually, they discovered the artesian water source that would later become the Citadel. The site wasn't empty, so when they tried to seize it, a fierce battle ensued. In the end, only Colonel Moore and Major Kalashnikov survived with their small assault team, ultimately defeating the enemy forces. That is how Colonel Moore became Immortan Joe and tasked his trusted ally Major Kalashnikov with restoring and commanding an abandoned lead mine at the west of the Citadel. It was actually Major Kalashnikov who took the abandoned mine and transformed it into a facility to produce small arms, gunpowder, and ammunition, making him the judge, jury, and executioner of the Bullet Farm. Throughout his life, the Bullet Farmer was obsessed with firearms and practically felt incomplete without a gun. He even had some of his teeth replaced with bullets and literally wore clothing made up of ammunition pouches. Major Kalashnikov drove a vehicle called the Peacemaker, which combined the hull of a Valiant Charger with a Ripsaw light tank chassis. Interestingly enough, his surname was inspired by Mikhail Kalashnikov, the inventor of the AK-47 and other firearms. During the events of Fury Road, the Bullet Farmer joined Immortan Joe in the chase after his escaped wives. When Angharad and Joe's infant son died, he led a night raid on the war rig to capture Joe's remaining 4 wives. Later, the Bullet Farmer lost his eyesight when Furiosa shot out his vehicle's spotlight, which caused the hot glass shards to pierce his eyes and blind him. Despite this, he kept going on in a rage, calling himself names like the Scales of Justice and the Conductor of the Choir of Death, shooting wildly at the war rig and its people, but Max eventually took him down, destroying his vehicle and bringing back his bandoliers as proof of his death. The Badlands. Even if the name is pretty obvious, the Badlands are the canyon-covered area of the Wasteland. This region was mainly the home of 2 groups of people, the Buzzards and the Rock Riders. While the Buzzards made their home in a place called the Sunken City, hidden in caves below the canyons and mesas, you'll find the Rock Riders on the surface riding modified dirt bikes and motorcycles across the rough terrain. The Rock Riders. So the Rock Riders rose up as a group of bandits who set up their camps within the Rock Rider Canyon. I personally think this group is a part of Dementus' bike horde that went rogue in Furiosa and formed their own faction. These Rock Riders wear tan leather pants and tan shirts with strips of frayed brown fabric, along with furs, helmets, and goggles that have mesh or knit fabric hanging from them. They're like motorized mercenaries bouncing through the canyons from cliff to cliff and seem to be the only ones skilled enough to navigate the wasteland Wasteland's treacherous mountain paths under modified and supercharged gas and Yamaha motorcycles. Their territory guards the only passageway through a towering wall of mountains, which acts as the main strategic point where they wait to ambush any vehicles passing through. Any vehicle they trap are stripped of their important part, which are in turn traded or sold to Citadel, GasTown, and Bullet Farm in exchange for crucial supplies. In Fury Road, we see them making a deal with Furiosa, agreeing to block the canyon by cleverly placing explosives to effectively slow down Immortan Joe's forces. In exchange, she offered them 3,000 whole gallons of gasoline, but there is one thing you should note: these rock riders are much more cooperative than the buzzards, and were seen to be relatively more open to negotiation and cooperation. They at least consider proposed deals rather than immediately resorting to violence. However, even their cooperative nature had its limits, because after they found out what Furiosa actually did to incur Joe's wrath, they called off the negotiation in order to avoid the wrath of 3 whole war parties from the Citadel, GasTown, and Bullet Farm. The Sunken City. The Sunken City is a rather intriguing setting inhabited by the group of Russian bandits we saw in the Fury Road known as the Buzzards. Drawing inspiration from the 2015 Mad Max video game, the Sunken City is portrayed as the underground caverns of an international-sized airport, now buried under massive sand dunes and reclaimed by the unforgiving desert. In the game, this underground airport is referred to as the Underdune and is said to be a rather dangerous location. The Buzzards. As I've mentioned before, the Buzzards are a tribe of Russian-speaking scavengers who have made their home in the Sunken City's underground burrows. Emerging from the hidden tunnels, they are like metal pirates from the buried depths, with their bodies swathed in bandages to ward off the scorching desert sun. Even their vehicles are covered with rusty metal spikes to keep their enemies far away from them during an attack. The Buzzards pretty much exist to hunt scrap in their harsh and unforgiving wasteland environment. Their spiked vehicles and their scavenging knack had earned them the title of the lowest common denominator in the Wasteland. Another contributing factor to their low rank in the Wasteland is that their home region literally sits in the border of the last road, also known as Fury Road, which serves as a vital connection between the Citadel and GasTown. So anyone brave or foolish enough to go into the Badlands cannot leave without facing the notorious Buzzards. Unlike the War Boys, who believe in salvaging and repurposing found materials for the rebirth of society, the Buzzards have a starkly different philosophy. They are not interested in rebuilding or progress. Instead, they are pure consumers of the remnants of the old world, functioning primarily as scrap merchants. To them, a piece of steel is just that. They do not see the potential for a sedan, and just like that, a human is merely meat for them. Not out of disrespect, but because they are, in fact, cannibals. In addition to that, the Buzzards are known to breed moths for sustenance, in order to survive in the harsh wasteland through any means necessary. Coming to their fleet of vehicles, it is really a sight to behold, as all their trucks are covered in metal spikes and mostly crafted from scrap metal. Among their notable rides are the spiked jalopies and the powerful Buzzard excavator. Another distinctive feature of their vehicles is the addition of circular blade saws, although these did prove pretty useless against Furiosa's war rig. So that was the entire social hierarchy of the Wasteland as seen in Mad Max Fury Road and its recently released prequel Furiosa. The Wasteland, no doubt, is a hopeless place, but Miller's world's carefully crafted dystopian society is always on the high, and through this power struggle and distribution, we see the concept of Darwinism upheld at its goriest test. What do you think of the Wasteland's social levels? Do let us know your thoughts in the comment box below.
If you enjoyed this video, click on the like button and comment below about which other movie reviews you would want to watch. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.